Have a very good day, everyone, and welcome to this OECD session on the role of green hydrogen for global energy transformation and the role of international collaboration to facilitate the green hydrogen economy globally. As we all know, the green hydrogen has been receiving significant attention from both the policy community, but also from the industry actors, the businesses. And increasingly, there are new project announcements being made across both, let's say, developed industrialized economies, but also many new announcements are coming from developing and emerging economies. What's interesting compared to a few years ago when we first started hearing about green hydrogen that is produced from renewable power and from the electrolysis of water is that now there is a value chain discussion. So sourcing renewable power, how that is being supplied for hydrogen production, but also what one produces from green hydrogen. So what are the derived products, how they can help domestically, but also for exports to improve and create regional markets. So the question about green hydrogen is not only about technology. It's also about how it will be financed, what type of business models are successful, and very important, and today this is something we want to understand and discuss more, is the role of international collaboration in creating hydrogen markets and making them also grow in the near and long-term future. At the OECD, the paper at the Environment Directorate on this topic, and we have chosen, based on our strengths and experiences at the OECD, to focus on the developing and emerging economies, how projects are being developed, with which success factors, how financing is brought, what business models are being chosen for projects that are already online and that are with final investment decisions. So to understand on ground what are the success factors behind green hydrogen development in developing and emerging economies. My colleague Joseph, who has led this process, the preparation of this working paper, will be sharing some insights in a minute with a presentation, and then we will have a dedicated discussion, a panel discussion with representatives of the governments, financing sector, and international organizations to focus also on the role of international collaboration. So thank you very much again for your participation and a very successful discussion that we will be listening about green hydrogen in a minute. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dea, for the introduction. Yeah, we may move to the next slides, please. Yeah, so as Dea explained, we have started our work on green hydrogen at the Environment Directorate of the OECD, following as well the beginning of our industry program this year, in which we have for which we have released a framework for industry's net zero transition in September. So this framework is a step-by-step approach to help countries and specifically emerging economies decarbonize a specific area of their industry sector. And we will start its implementation this quarter in Indonesia and Thailand. While preparing this framework, we have come across a lot of key technologies that would enable to decarbonize the industry sector, and one of them was hydrogen. Indeed, industry is one of the main consumer of hydrogen today. Also, it has a large potential to decarbonize various industry subsectors, and even beyond industry, it can also find applications to help abate emissions in the transport and power sectors. So in that context, we have started our work on green hydrogen, focusing on the opportunities and the success factor for investment with a focus on emerging economies. So our approach and what I will present today is first to show the importance of the value chain and how to assess the country potential, then understand the business cases and economic factors that may also drive investment, and that is supported by a number of case studies. And finally, identify suitable policies that will also facilitate the enabling conditions for investors. And all this work is, of course, also an opportunity to work on cross-cutting topics with other directorates here at the OECD and other international organizations. Next slide, please. Yeah, so as an introduction, so green hydrogen has been identified as a key technology to lead the world towards net zero emissions by mid-century. And in various scenarios that we have analyzed in that paper, we see that the role of green hydrogen that you can see on the left side is expected to increase by 3 to 6 times by mid-century to be consistent with net zero. So although its role may vary as well according to other decarbonization options, such as direct electrification with renewable power, carbon capture and storage, and a few other solutions, the role of green hydrogen could contribute to around 10% of the cumulative emissions reduction in a net zero emission scenario. And most of the hydrogen that will be produced by mid-century is expected to be green hydrogen produced out of renewable electricity. So we may move to the next slide. So the first question also in the discussions we have had with various emerging economies has been to identify where would green hydrogen be better suited. Indeed, it can be applied in a wide range of applications. There have been a lot of pilot projects and studies to identify its role in various industry subsectors, as well for transport applications, and finally to support the power systems, for instance, by enabling better integration of variable renewable energy, such as wind and solar. And it is a key step for a country to first analyze in its situation and given its own specificities, where green hydrogen could be one of the most valuable options. So we have summarized here something that is mainly based on global consensus, and we can identify some no regret applications that are usually defined as well based on the role that green hydrogen could play compared to other decarbonization options. So for instance, in some industry applications, hydrogen is not used for its energy content, but also for its chemical properties. And in that sense, it could be no regret. And for the grid integration of variable renewable energy, green hydrogen, such as batteries, for instance, can offer an excellent opportunity to help store the electricity. Many other applications, as you can see in the slide, are more country specific. And this is also why the integration of our green hydrogen work with our industry work, where we work with specific emerging economies, will help us better understand the country situation and national conditions. Next slide, please. So also to summarize this first part of the presentation, which is the general introduction on the role of hydrogen, we can see that currently green hydrogen amounts to more, or hydrogen amounts to more or less 100 million tons per year, and this is primarily gray hydrogen, so produced out of fossil fuels. It is mainly consumed today in the industry, notably in the fertilizers, refineries, and to some extent as well for methanol production or in steelmaking. And more than 85% of the hydrogen today is consumed and produced on the same industrial site. in the future, what we can see on this chart is that in 2050, industry will consume more than 300 million tons of hydrogen. But as well, we can see that transport and power applications for green hydrogen will develop, and in total, the hydrogen demand is expected to reach 600 million tons in 2050. Next slide, please. So our approach was primarily, as Dea mentioned in his introduction, to understand the value chain. So while there are many potential applications, there's also a need to understand the complexity of the value chain, from the availability of resources, and that is mainly renewable energy sources that will be at the inception of hydrogen production, as well all the transport, storage, and potential conversion phase that we call here the midstream part, and finally the downstream applications. And by downstream applications, we could of course mean the direct consumption of hydrogen where it is consumed, but as well the production of manufactured products such as green steel or green ammonia out of green hydrogen. And this could help as well develop local value chain and enable more downstream integration and industrial development, especially in countries endowed with large renewable resources. And what you may see in the dotted line of this chart is as well the export routes. So this is a key element to understand the evolution of the hydrogen in the coming decades. While today, as mentioned, it is mainly consumed and produced at the same location, in the future, up to 25% of the hydrogen could be globally traded, which could also provide the advantage of producing it in the countries where it can be produced at low cost, and exporting hydrogen or one of its derivatives, such as green ammonia or green products, to the large consumption centers. Next slide, please. So based on this applications study and value chain approach, we have prepared a small toolbox that is integrated in our working paper. So first, to help countries that are at a very early stage of defining their strategy, to conduct a short self-assessment of the hydrogen value chain, where the position, where are their strengths, weaknesses, and potential opportunities. The goal being to pinpoint all the potential applications at country level, to understand as well what might be missing in order to develop the entire hydrogen value chain and really reap the benefits of it. In the policy toolbox, we have also added 8 case studies where we have focused on real-life projects, so mainly projects that have reached or are close to reach the final investment decision, with a focus on emerging economies. The purpose here is to highlight what enabled this project to reach final investment decisions, what were the commonalities and the lessons learned that policymakers could use, and as well investors could use in order to foster the market creation and the market growth. So next slide, please. So maybe on that slide, I will go quite quickly. This is just to illustrate the complexity of the value chain with a business case. So here we have taken the example of the production of steelmaking based on a route relying on green hydrogen. And the key message here is mainly, as you can see, that the investment in the electrolyzer or the hydrogen storage and transport is actually not necessarily the main part of the transformation of to enable using hydrogen in that sector. Actually, transforming here the industrial assets, so the DRI-EAF plants, as well as building the renewable electricity that will be used as an input for the electrolyzer, represent most of the investment. And for that reason, and the high capital intensity of all these areas, this is also very important to analyze the conditions to share the investment risks between various stakeholders. So we may move to the next slide. So the first part that we described in the previous slide is related to the investment itself. One should also note that when moving from conventional technologies to green hydrogen, not only the capex might be higher, but as well the operational costs. And for that reason, this is also key to understand what kind of policies, what kind of conditions might be necessary or might be helpful in order to bring a level or to build a level playing field between clean technologies, be it with green hydrogen, be it as well with other decarbonization options and the conventional technologies. And all of these conditions in terms of global markets, as it is the case for the markets that are, to which refineries, fertilizer plants or steel plants are exposed, are international markets. And this is also where international collaboration can play a role to build some interoperability or to build some competitive fields that is acceptable for the projects to evolve. Next slide, please. So on top of this, we see business case analysis that are a bit theoretical. As mentioned, we have done 8 case studies. So here, this is just an example to illustrate the kind of projects we have focused on. So in that case, this is a project led by a company called HAF Global that is producing electrofuels in Chile. So electrofuels are basically produced out of green hydrogen and capture CO2 in their pilot plants, which is for the moment at demonstration level. But the purpose of the company, and the construction is expected to start soon, is to move to industrial scale in the project called HAF Cabo Negro, where you can see that more than 300 megawatts of wind turbines will be available, more than 200 megawatts of electrolyzer will be built, and it will enable produce the consumption of e-gasoline that is equivalent to what 500,000 cars would use annually. So we can move to the next slides already. Just to understand as well how we have structured the case studies and how we have structured the lessons learned from them. So we have 4 key areas. First, analyzing the business models. So what was the key rationale for the project to evolve? And if I take the example of HAF Global, the e-fuel market exists. There is already a premium for that market. And for that reason, this was more easily acceptable as well by investors. And the project is based in Chile, thanks to the high availability of onshore wind, so low cost of renewable electricity production. So this was for us the starting point. After this, we checked as well the project's governance, meaning how was it built? And we could see the importance of public-private partnership as the market is still at an early stage. Very often the role of public entities were noted by project developers. And as well, many projects of our case, these were vertically integrated, either through joint companies, but also through partnerships to make sure, for instance, to secure renewable electricity at low price or to secure offtake contracts for the production of green hydrogen. And we have as well studied the enabling market conditions and de-risking investment measures, which we will see in the next slide, as well as the financing conditions, which, as mentioned earlier, aim to share risks among actors with quite a significant focus on project finance at this stage, replicating what exists for the offshore wind industry. So next slide, please. So regarding the enabling market measures, as well as the risking instruments, we have here summarized also in the working paper a large number of instruments that we have seen in the literature and in policy toolboxes. Only a few of them so far have been developed specifically for green hydrogen, but there is a growing trend, and we have seen over the last years more than 25 countries implementing national hydrogen strategies and converting them into hydrogen regulations and laws. And therefore, this is also in our pipeline to analyze the cost benefits of these regulations when they are implemented, and to analyze the role that international dialogue could play in order to analyze what are the impact of policies, what are the most efficient ones, and what successes can be replicated in other geographies. So next slide, please. So finally, and also to make the link with the panel discussion, we have analyzed how can international organizations support international collaboration, how can they create an enabling environment for investment. And we have come out with 4 key roles and family of actions that we could take. The first one is on technical assistance and sharing best practices. This is also in our program where we work with emerging economies, something that was widely asked for, to build, also to have some capacity buildings and skills development to accompany the growth of the market. Second, the work on regulations, codes, and standards. So some codes and standards already exist at country level, but as explained, the trade of green hydrogen and hydrogen more generally is expected to grow in the coming decades. And for that reason, a consensus of definition, interoperability of codes and standards, and traceability of the hydrogen and its carbon footprint will be necessary. Third, of course, the international dialogue, be it on the governments, the discussions on trade rules, industrial policy, will also be a key focus area where international organizations can also steer the debate. And last but not least, to have projects come off the ground, it's necessary to have the financing, and therefore building on the existing investor community in tools such as blended finance facility, where public and private actors can work together to help the markets grow, will also be fundamental. So that is the end of the presentation of our working paper, and we'll provide, of course, the link to it on the InWing platform after the meeting. We can move now to the panel discussions, and I'm very glad to welcome today 4 panelists. So we have Ahmed Mahous, who's General Manager of Energy Researches and Studies in the Ministry of Electricity and Renewable Energy of Egypt. Ruth Kempener as well, so from the European Commission, who is team leader for the hydrogen financing and international. Emanuele Bianco from the International Renewable Energy Agency, so the IRENA, where he's a program officer. And we have as well in our panel, Mayada Magdi-Rageb, who's country senior representative in the Egypt office of the Japan International Cooperation Agency. So we'll start maybe with short introductory remarks from each speaker, starting with Mr. Mahous.
Hello, Joseph. At the outset, I would like, it's my pleasure and honor to participate in this event. I would like to thank OECD for organizing this event. I am Jean Ahmed Mahous, General Manager of Energy Research and Studies from Egyptian Ministry of Electricity and Renewable Energy. I already work in the technical team that already preparing our national strategy for hydrogen here in Egypt. I think this event is very important. It's synchronizing with COP27 that already now is already held in Egypt in Sharm el-Sheikh. I think the most booming thing in the COP is green hydrogen and the renewables and the green. Already it's a climate change matter. So the green thing is already the booming one. I think. Green hydrogen is already a main pillar for decarbonizing our energy economy. So all countries and all entities now are going to study how they can enhance cooperation for green hydrogen. For Egypt, we are already now working on preparing our national strategy. I think we already announced yesterday the strategic framework of our strategy that Egypt already want to have a share in the global trade market for hydrogen with a percentage about 8% on 2040. It's our ambitious goal here in Egypt. We will depend our world-leading expertise and innovation in hydrogen, and we will already depend with excellent renewable energy resources here in Egypt with a competitive price. And it's our strategic location because we are in the position between three continents, and we have a long coast and ports in the Mediterranean and the Red Sea and the Suez Canal offshore. We will depend on all of this to enhance our green hydrogen economy here in Egypt. I will talk about a little more about our first hydrogen project. Already, we announced our first hydrogen project on 8th of November. That is with private sector, with company Scatic. The first phase of the in Ain Sokhna port, the first phase of the project already announced it. And after the finishing of the project, it will be consist of megawatt electrolyzer and 260 megawatt of solar and wind project, wind energy. I think it is the first step on the ground for Egypt to go on to enhance the green economy. And there is a lot of MOUs that already signed with private sector. I will talk about this MOUs and how we can make our business model after that in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. I invite now Ruth Campiner from the European Commission to provide some short introduction.
Thank you very much, Joseph, and thank you very much again also for your report, which is actually very, very useful. Now, the European Commission published its hydrogen strategy in 2020. The reason to do so is that we were preparing kind of the next decade in terms of our energy transition policies. And so we chose to have a hydrogen strategy, exactly as you explained also in your report, because we saw two major important needs. The first of all is that in Europe, we've made big progress on renewables in the electricity sector, but not in the end-use sectors. And we really need to look at the next step of decarbonizing those end-use sectors. Now, in those end-use sectors, we indeed see industry and transport as some of the key applications for hydrogen. And what we want to make sure is that the players, the industrial players in those sectors actually can make decisions that they shift their current production processes or their current transport applications like big ships, etc., and start investing in those industrial processes or ships that can, for example, run on hydrogen or their derivatives. The second reason that we were looking at hydrogen is that we currently have about 35% of our electricity produced from renewables. Now, in 2030, that will be around 70%, with the majority, 50% of that or more, coming from solar and wind. So again, there we see big synergies, as you also have in your report, with the production of renewable hydrogen. Now, another important element, and I think that's very relevant for today's discussion, is that, of course, the European Commission sets a policy framework for 27 countries. And if we look at our 27 countries, there's big differences there. You have small countries like Belgium with lots of hydrogen demand today, very industrialized, with very little opportunities for, in comparison, for local production of renewables, except for offshore. You have other countries like Sweden with very cheap, very good renewable power generation, but hardly any hydrogen consumption today. We also have landlocked countries like Czech Republic, which has hydrogen consumption today in industry, looking at opportunities how to replace that. So we really have kind of a diverse set of countries. And what we're trying to do with our European legislative framework is to kind of provide a common kind of framework for the development of a hydrogen market. Now here, and then I'll end my introduction, is I think where your report comes in. Because if I look at the regulatory framework that we've put forward, and which is now being discussed, it really is a regulatory framework to allow this value chain approach. We have pieces of legislation in there which really look at energy policy. So how can we help and support the introduction of hydrogen in our energy mix? But our legislative framework has also initiatives, for example, in the transport sector, in the maritime and the aviation sector, to help really the energy sector to make that shift. We have policies which are really looking at the industry. So how can we start helping the industry, but also on financing? For example, how can we change our fiscal policies to really kind of enable renewable hydrogen to come in vis-a-vis fossil-based hydrogen? Last but not least, we also have very specific infrastructure policy being developed for hydrogen today. And these are completely new. We've never had rules for hydrogen pipelines, hydrogen terminals, or hydrogen storage systems in place. But we are already doing that to make sure that the full value chain can be covered with one regulatory comprehensive framework. And I think that experience that we're gaining right now, especially because it has to be applied to 27 countries, would also be very relevant in international cooperation with other countries around the world.
Thank you very much, Ruth, for the introduction and all the information provided on the projects and initiatives taken at European level. Emanuele Bianco from the IRENA will also now provide some introduction remarks. Thank you, Emanuele.
Thank you, Joseph. So welcome everyone. I'm Emanuele Bianco, Program Officer in IRENA, that for who doesn't know is the International Renewable Energy Agency. And I work in the policy unit, and it's now 3-4 years that we started assessing the hydrogen policies and the hydrogen strategies. Of course, when we started this work, there were very little examples, but there was a lot of interest. And we thought it was important to start assessing the best practices, understanding what was going on in order to be able to provide to our wider membership, developing countries and the developed world, some knowledge on what is happening worldwide. And in doing so, we also have a collaborative framework where we put together industries and policymakers that meet on a regular basis to discuss about the main issues and identify the main challenges where we as IRENA can provide some additional knowledge and focus our studies. Because after all, we are also a knowledge provider, manager, and communicator. Just recently, I take this opportunity because today we are going to launch the Accelerating Hydrogen Deployment in the G7 report, where we took the opportunity to assess what is going on in the G7 countries and how these different group made of very different members are either harmonized or not harmonized or misaligned in their policies and in their strategies. And what we found is that while there is some wide understanding of the necessity of using hydrogen, the end users prioritized and the policies chosen have some differences. And this, in our study, we find that may actually become a barrier, a transitional barrier for these early movers. And it's important instead that these early movers start working well together now, because they will set up the rules, set up the world of hydrogen by 2030 and then 2050. So it's we provided a set of recommendations for them that I think it's applicable for a large number of countries, in particular in the developed world, but also in the developing world. Above all, I think that this report that you just published is important because international cooperation will be essential, because the hydrogen sector is widely unknown, and we will need to have all the information we have from the first movers as soon as possible. And we need to understand the challenges as soon as possible. And so I think that what you've done is important, is key, and I welcome it, and I'm very curious to see how it will move ahead.
Thank you very much, Emanuele. And I propose now to Mayada, so from the Japan International Cooperation Agency, to provide her introductory remarks.
Thank you so much, Joseph, for inviting us to this discussion on a very important topic, which is the green hydrogen. Well, as a bilateral development partner, a Japanese government organization, and also operating in Egypt, there are three main points that outline the relevance and importance of the green hydrogen to our institution. First, on the global scale, of course, we find that many countries have already committed to carbon neutrality and have several actions started on the ground to promote green hydrogen as a means, of course, to contribute to the low carbon economic transition. So, as you touched upon, the green hydrogen would help the decarbonization of the industries. It's also supporting the integration of the renewable energy, and it can be also converted into the derivatives, leading to mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions. So, from this perspective, we believe that there will be increased demand for hydrogen coming forward. Second, we also look at Japan's policy, and in this regard, Japan has declared its carbon neutrality by 2050 and has a major interest in promoting green hydrogen as featured in their green growth strategy. So as Japan's energy sufficiency is quite low, and considering that energy accounts for 80% of the greenhouse gas emissions, so then green hydrogen becomes important to reduce the supply risks through domestic production as well as diversified foreign suppliers. Third, we also look at the Egyptian context, since our office is operating in Egypt, and as Engineer Mahrous mentioned, Egypt has really abundant low-cost renewable energy and has it can be a major potential producer, not only because of this, but also because of the proximity, the location, and the being near to the important markets. So having said that, we all realize that there are challenges ahead to promote the green hydrogen, costs issued, storage, transportation, building knowledge, experience. You mentioned many of them in your presentation, and we'll touch upon later in the panel discussion. So we believe, as a development partner, as a Japanese government institution, there are lots of potentials of support that we can provide to these areas. So from that perspective, green hydrogen becomes a very important topic for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayada, for your remarks. My first question will be to Engineer Mahrous and Emanuele Bianco about the role that international dialogue can play in order to coordinate the initiatives from governments, industrial players, and international collaboration. So, Engineer Mahrous, you have mentioned, for instance, the partnership and memorandum of understandings that Egypt is currently signing with various players. And Emanuele, you have mentioned the collaborative framework that you are developing at the arena. And I would be happy to hear your thoughts about this.
Thank you, Joseph. As our colleagues say, that the green hydrogen, especially not global markets, is not mature. So there is no certain business model or pathway that we all should move on it, or it's a best pathway that we should all follow it. So every country try with the private sector and with the institution and with bilateral cooperation with others to identify what is the best way for this green hydrogen issue. In Egypt, we already have signed 16 MOUs with private sector. In first phase, we already want the private sector to build a pilot project with 100 or 200 megawatt for fertilizer. After that, the first phase could be with gigawatts, but the first phase or pilot phase is 1 on 200 megawatts, sorry, electrolyzer. We already share with private sector some of our infrastructure. We have already a land allocated for wind resources or solar with already studies environmental and environmental impact. All studies already are proven and deliver it for the private sector. We already have the grid that can evacuate this renewable and transmit it to the hydrogen hub. We already have allocate a land in a port with cooperation with Suez Canal zone. This land will allocate it for hydrogen facility. This is the role of government in this project, that we facilitate the infrastructure, we deliver the land for the private sector. We already enhance our infrastructure to can transmit the energy, renewable energy, for the investors that it help him to provide the hydrogen and the port that it's mainly we will target export hydrogen, so either ammonia or hydrogen, green hydrogen, because I think our local market still need more enhancement to use hydrogen, as we all know that it's a market driven. If there is no global market for the green products, we already in Egypt already ranked in the fertilizer. We already I think the fourth on the global world about producing fertilizer, but it's a gray, not green. In order to transform our industry from gray to green, they must be encouraging price for green products. It's still needed for the global market. It's one of issue that we all need in order to enhance the market and transfer the market to be green. Regarding the MOUs, we already signed yesterday 8 partnership agreement. We already upgrade the half of 16 MOUs to partnership agreement with the private sector. It's the first step for implementing the project. I think we are going now we are racing against time in order to achieve our ambitious with this project. Another thing for international cooperation, various countries already have programs, have to harmonize, to explore harmonizing standards and encouraging emerging with global hydrogen trade. Here in Egypt, we already cooperate with different entities and countries. We already today will sign an MOUs with European Union regarding strategic partnership in renewable hydrogen. We already signed letter declaration of intent with Germany for renewable hydrogen. We already cooperate with JICA in capacity building and regarding green hydrogen. We already cooperate with EBRD. EBRD is already the financial institution that finance the preparing of our strategy. So we already try to cooperate with different countries and entities regarding green hydrogen. I want to mention that there is an initiative that was launched collaboratively between His Excellency President Fattah Sisi and His Excellency President De Croo, Prime Minister of Belgium, for Renewable Hydrogen Global Forum. This forum is a platform for dialogue with producer and consumer for renewable energy, renewable hydrogen players all over the world, private sector, organization, financial institution. This platform will already try to do something to enhance our international cooperation, try to unify our sounds regarding the regulation. It's an important issue, that regulation, the code and the standards, because proving that this hydrogen is green is a difficult process. We need a unified standard in order to can all together enhance our global market. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And maybe, Emanuele, you may also comment on how IRENA is supporting the international dialogue and bringing together many actors together in the collaborative framework.
Thank you. Yeah, let me just start it by saying that in order to assist, in order to create an international dialogue, in order to make it effective, we should first understand why this is needed. And in your first question, you asked about how to make together, collaborate governments and industrial players. And already if you start thinking about all different governments and industrial players, we have very different needs, very different drivers to pursue the hydrogen strategy. In the report that is going to be launched today, we identified already 5 different frames under which you can put why we are pursuing an hydrogen strategy. And at the same time, industrial players have very different needs. They may decarbonize because they are forced to do so, because of new regulations, or because they want to become first movers. And already in the big industrial sector, we have steel makers and ammonia producers, fertilizer producers that needs different kind of feedstock. And therefore starting talking with the possible ammonia producers or with liquid hydrogen producers and so on and so forth. So it's a very fragmented sector, and this dialogue can help in creating an understanding. Moreover, another challenge that I should mention before going into how dialogue is created is also that we are in a situation for many, many projects of a deadlock. So a situation where potential actors would actually develop the value chain, but they cannot because they need information from other actors who in turn cannot operate, cannot provide this information because they need information from the same actors. So it's a little of a chicken and egg problem, but I prefer to call it a deadlock because it's actually more than a chicken and egg. We have a lot of actors altogether that needs the information. Off-takers needs to know the quality and the quantity of hydrogen that may be produced. The developers can only provide this information and the prices only if they have an offtake agreement, and they can communicate with the finance sector, so their project, only if they have already achieved a situation where the risk decreases substantially. And in order to decrease this risk, they need information from policymakers about regulations and policies that will be in place, additionality rules, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, policymakers are experimenting this new system, this new sector, and they may be wary into provide subsidies or provide a regulation for a sector that is widely unknown. So we have these 2 elements that needs where collaboration can assist. One is the fragmented markets, the fragmented sectors that of actors that have different drivers and different needs. And on the other side, a huge need of information, a huge need for clarity and data and experience. So in the report that I mentioned, we actually started delineating 2 kinds of possible collaboration, possible action and possible international dialogue. One is the collaboration first. So there are aspects where governments, industrial players, etc., should start sitting together and agreeing on rules together. For example, on standards or on future markets, or focusing on certain sector instead of on others for using hydrogen. But there is also a huge need for action. And this is the second category, the action first recommendations. There is a need for, in particular for those that wants to become first movers, to actually move, to actually experiment new policies, experiment practices, experiment the transport of hydrogen, so that this experience can be translated everywhere else in the world, for the followers, for the developing world, for the countries that are not willing to invest in hydrogen as of today, but they will be. And the third action, that is where actually the collaborative framework is doing more, is the information sharing for something that it's already out there, for where knowledge can be created with using current experience, and sharing it would assist policymakers and the industrial players to start actually doing so, to acting.
Thank you very much, Emanuele. That's a very comprehensive approach. I will now turn to Mayada and Ruth to comment maybe more on the financing as well. So the first question would be maybe in which parts of the value chain the foreign direct investment or the international finance would be the most suitable and effective to attract funds, and conversely, which would be the areas of the value chain that today are maybe less mature and may require support, for instance, through official development assistance or concessional finance. So maybe Ruth, you would like to comment first, and then Mayada might explain what JICA is doing on that field.
Thank you. Yeah, so actually, financing has been one of the key pillars of our European hydrogen strategy, just recognizing that the production of both renewable and low carbon hydrogen is not cost competitive yet. Although in Europe today, with the high natural gas prices, industrial users are looking at it differently. So if we do our analysis for the targets which we have within the EU, which is, for example, 10 million tons of renewable hydrogen production, actually 60% of our investment needs are in getting more renewables into the grid. So this is actually a huge chunk of all of the investments which is needed, at least within Europe. And then you have, of course, the electrolyzers, which are about like 15% of all investments needed. Then transmission and storage. Again, if you add that up together, it's around 10% of the investment needs. And then, of course, and not to forget that, investments in the end-use sectors. For example, steel sectors replacing their blast furnaces with DRI systems. We're talking about the development of new ammonia plants, where the steam methane reforming plants are replaced by electrolyzers. Investments in new ships, for example. So this is kind of the overall view of where we see kind of the investments needed. Now, one of the key aspects, at least in Europe today, is that the costs of renewable power, even though they've decreased very substantially within Europe and they're really low, they're not low enough in order to kind of get to the prices where renewable hydrogen becomes competitive. So here we are expecting that up to 2030, there's still kind of investments needed there to make that happen. Now, another important element, and I think that is also both within the EU but internationally, is how do you start financing transmission and storage of hydrogen? Because you will have to build the transmission and storage first. And then, of course, the cost can only be recuperated once the hydrogen starts flowing through those infrastructure needs. So again, there, I think it's a really important part of the supply chain, where at least from our side, we're looking at how can we provide, for example, grants within the EU, but also assistance outside of the EU in order to make that infrastructure becoming available. And last but not least is the end-use sector investments that are needed. And there, again, I think one of the key elements now is to start slowly but surely investing in those industrial end-use applications. And here, one of the key aspects is to make sure that those end-use sectors can also reap the benefits of the green products that they are providing. And there, I think Europe at least has been clear in that they are very keen to get either green hydrogen or its derivatives, and that there is a market for those green products within the EU. And that's, of course, why we put like objectives and kind of we proposed clear targets for the uptake of the hydrogen in industry and in transport sector, irrespectively of whether that hydrogen is produced within Europe or whether it's imported. And I think that's an important kind of key element to get that green premium into the market, and therefore allow projects around the world to kind of come to commercial terms.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Mayada, if you would like to comment as well on the financing part.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, I do agree with all what Ruth has mentioned, and I don't want to duplicate what other panelists have been saying, but I share the same opinion. Of course, given the early stage of development of the green hydrogen at the moment, we understand it requires sufficient funding in order to scale it up. When looking at across the value chain, already Ruth mentioned about the midstream part of the storage and distribution, and the difficulty because hydrogen is required to be stored in high volumes and also high pressure and low temperature. So this makes the investments quite expensive. On the downstream side, you also touched upon the industries and the needed transformational works. On the production side or upstream side, I may add here, in addition to the deployment of renewable energy, also the issue of having pure water for the electrolyzers, because this, in case of Egypt, for example, there are several desalination projects ongoing, so that there could be a source of pure water. And amid all the water scarcity that emerging economies and some of the developing countries are facing, I think this also becomes a challenge that we have to look at and provide support in the value chain. Having said that, it's not very easy at this moment, at this very early stage, to give the decision on the financing and the eligibility and what type of financing is required for every project. It depends, of course, on the economic viability and bankability of the project, which we understand, or we think that it depends on several issues. One of them is, of course, the project structure. It's required to see, or the investor have to have the whole view of the value chain from the generation up to the off-taker. And as Joseph mentioned earlier, sometimes the companies go for a joint together so that they can cover the whole value chain. Also, there is a technological risk because this is a very new technology for the electrolyzers, and we believe, of course, that the risk of durability is there. And as technological advancements take place, I think this will help more and more in the commercialization and broaden more the access to finance. Transportation issues also you touched upon, and they include both financial in terms of high cost, as well as technical and safety risks as well. And a regulatory framework which can both protect against the downside risks, as well as offer some incentives or policy initiatives which could improve the project economies. So the first large-scale projects are likely to utilize multi-sources of funding or blended finance, combination of grants, as well as concessional financing. And this high capital cost needed for the green hydrogen development is really requiring the government support, the public support, as well as the private, of course. But we believe that the government and the public support is quite required to encourage investors and make the project more bankable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayada. I have many other questions, but we also received some from the audience on the virtual pavilion. So the first question from the audience is addressed to Emanuele. And the question is, how does IRENA, or what are the financial models that could make sense to overcome two main barriers? First, the capital intensity all along the value chain, but as well regarding the transportation of hydrogen, which is at the same time not fully technically mature, as was highlighted as well by Ruth and Mayada. and also can be costly over long distances. So how do you see these investments ongoing, Emanuele?
That's a very, very difficult question. As I mentioned, the hydrogen sector is a nascent sector, and we have a very little experience. The very first recommendation that we gave in the G7 report that I mentioned, I mean, among the many recommendations we gave, there is also to act, to experiment, to test new solutions policy-wise as well, so that they can be replicated, and so that this answer will become straight ahead in the next 2 or 3 years. However, yes, as you mentioned, the hydrogen sector, the hydrogen cost is it depends mostly on the capital investments in renewable energy power plants and electrolyzers. And we have some experience in developing first projects, first of their kind in Europe and in the world now for variable renewable energy. There has been some very successful example in supporting first movers, mostly with grants, loans, and any investment assistance from the government to ease this initial investment that is among the main barriers to develop green hydrogen, as well for the transport of hydrogen. But we should remember that in this case, the role of the private and the public sector becomes a bit more nuanced, because the gas grid is usually on the regulated, is owned by public bodies, and the evolution of the gas grid will depend then on investments decision that will come from the public sector as well, while for the transport of and as well for ports that are usually owned by private-public partnerships, we have a role of both government investment and, in this case, also private investment to welcome new hydrogen boats with hydrogen carriers or carrying liquid hydrogen. To come back to your initial question, and I agree with what Ruud said, and in general, I think that the European Commission suggestion policies are actually very progressive. We have to create a market for this green hydrogen at the end, because the main difference that we have between hydrogen and the power sector is that the offtake risk is actually important, and we have to sign offtake agreements in order to reach the FEED stage, the final investment decision stage, that is almost a buzzword in the hydrogen sector. And in order to do so, governments have 2 choices. Or they support industries that wants to change and wants to invest, to want to buy green hydrogen or invest in green hydrogen for their own self-consumption, and therefore a sort of carrot approach. But there is also the stick approach. There is the approach that says, let's put a quota for green hydrogen. Let's ban technologies that are still using fossil fuels, or mandate the change by 2030, 2040. And this is an interesting aspect, because it's basically a return of industrial policy making that was a bit frowned upon during the 90s until 2008, because it was seen as a bad ways for governments to exert control on the industry. But the energy transition is asking for that, for this kind of policies. It's asking to select some industries to be the winners, and to assist those industries that will not have a role in the energy transition to mature and to change, to evolve, and become carbon neutral as well. And it's important that these policies are taken now, because for large industries, they are mostly one refurbishment away from 2050. So decisions that are taken now will immediately impact 2050. And therefore, these policies are timely, important, and incredibly key.
Thank you very much, Emanuele. I can also confirm that in our case studies, the offtake risk was always highlighted by the industrials as one of the key points to reach final investment decision. I see that Ruud also would like to step in to add something. So Ruud, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think indeed there is also, and I'm just following up on Emmanuel's intervention. There's also kind of a third way to enable those financial models, and I think that's what we kind of try to pursue within the European Commission. So indeed here, what we propose is that we put in targets for the uptake of hydrogen in industry and transport. But we have the unique ability to put those targets on our member states. So we're not asking an individual company to have a quota, but we're putting this upon our member states. So essentially what we're doing here is that our member states, our countries are committing themselves to have a volume of hydrogen being used in those in this end-use sectors. And we're doing this for two reasons. So the one reason is that through those quotas, we can get visibility about the volume of demand in 2030. So in terms of this, and I absolutely agree with that, and in terms of a situation where we're in today, where there's lots of unknowns, through those quotas, we give certainty about what the demand volume will be in 2030. So that will then allow producers to take that information and then go back and see, okay, when and how can I start producing, both within the EU or internationally, in order to meet those demand volumes. Secondly, what this does, it gives some certainty to the end users, the off-takers, that there will be hydrogen available in 2030. And that also comes to kind of a third element in this whole discussion is, of course, in order to have those quotas, you need to know what the renewable hydrogen is. And therefore, I think, which is also really important, we're setting those quotas in 2030, that we're saying, okay, you start developing the renewable hydrogen, you have the definitions of renewable hydrogen, which evolve over time as the industry matures. But that gives us like 8 years until we have that quota that needs to be reached and where we have the specific criteria. So this is one of the ways, at least within the European Union, where we try to kind of help steer this very kind of emerging market into a situation in 2030 where all of the kind of the pieces of the puzzle are together. And I think something like that, even internationally, would also be very interested if we're working with other countries to create kind of similar approaches and have this kind of global market evolve over time as well.
Thank you very much, Ruth. There is as well a question to Ahmed. Maybe if you could keep the answer in a couple of minutes so that we can also ask a question to Mayada. You have mentioned many memorandum of understandings and partnerships and projects. The question from the audience is as well, have these projects already reached final investment decisions? And what is the production starting dates for the first projects?
Thank you, Joseph. Regarding our MOUs, we already signed 16 MOUs. 8 of them already signed an framework agreement yesterday. This is the first step of contracting regarding these projects. The eight project, it is planned to take 2 years to fully commissioned with pilot project, as I said before, with 100 to 200 megawatt electrolyzer. I think this is the step is needed to finalize the feasibility study and beginning the implementing of the project for the 8 projects that already signed the 8 frameworks. The others 8 that already signed MOUs already they ongoing on finishing the feasibility study. After that, they already will later sign the framework agreement to make it in process already. I say the timeline is about 2 years, 2 years from the signing of framework agreement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. And maybe the last question to Mayada, also on international cooperation, to understand how the technical transfer, technical assistance can be implemented as well from the first movers, such as Europe, such as Japan, as also Emmanuel mentioned the role of first movers, to share knowledge and help scale up projects in other geographies and more specifically in emerging economies?
Yes, thank you. Well, I'll try to be short because many of the panelists mentioned already the challenges faced and the need to have in place strategies and policies, and that these strategies should be based on appropriate analysis of each country's situation, and also should not just be based on ambitions, but the real policy actions that could enable their implementation. Also, incentives were touched upon as needed for promoting further the green hydrogen market. And for instance, some having a carbon price for some industries or so on, specifications and the standards were also raised, and capacity building. So in order to create this enabling environment for promotion of the green hydrogen, we believe that capacity building is really required. And as the market moves ahead, there will be a need for more and more skills to support this hydrogen economy. Having said that, as Engineer Mahrous mentioned, JICA has been cooperating with the government of Egypt and also other countries as well to share knowledge on the green hydrogen application. There is an example in Japan for Kitakyushu city. It's an industrial city which had several demonstration activities on the ground. One of them is to implement a hydrogen pipeline and supply hydrogen to fuel cells in eco homes. There are also demonstrations for measuring impurities in hydrogen, for measuring the impact of the hydrogen on the stainless steel, and for also generating renewable hydrogen from renewable energy and supply of the produced hydrogen within the city. So through our training programs, we try to share the knowledge of the first movers, as you mentioned, and share the demonstration experiences undertaken in Japan, and such knowledge exchange, we believe, will help the countries raise their capacities and also provide useful information to promote the green hydrogen development. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayada. So we are now close to the end of the event. Although it was short, I would like to thank all of you, Ahmed, Ruth, Emanuele, and Mayada, for all your insights. It was a very rich discussions, and I'm sure that the audience learned a lot. And I will now turn to Dea Sagan, my colleague from the OECD, who will provide some concluding remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all our speakers. And Joseph, thank you as well. Just to summarize this very rich discussion as much as I can, because so many important points have been brought to attention. I think most of us have mentioned that the success factors of existing and nearly final projects are about market availability, not only locally, but also regionally, low-cost power availability, and supported with also schemes for land allocation, infrastructure provision and support, public-private partnerships, and de-risking for financing. We've dealt with many issues that pertain to international cooperation on policies, business models, financing, data, and experience sharing. Most of you mentioned the targets and mandates that are set by the countries, not only for hydrogen, but also for its derivatives. And this is, of course, becoming important as the decarbonization effort shifts or expands from power to end-use sectors, and also to create, of course, synergies between the power and hydrogen sectors. It seems the early opportunities for hydrogen derivatives are in the manufacturing industry, but also there are others in end-use sectors such as shipping, which will also be key for hydrogen trade. Yet the drivers and the needs of different off-takers and end-use sectors are very different. I think this was mentioned several times, because when one views it from the value chain perspective, this fragmentation needs to be understood. That will also impact how the international dialogue cooperation will shape in the future. And similarly, the policy choices seem to be quite different in various countries and regions, as the experiences you shared have shown. Yet there are some commonalities across the policy choices as well, because they focus on energy, on fiscal policy, infrastructure policy. And when I say infrastructure, it's grids, pipelines, desalination, etc. And they, as you see, characterized across the value chain of hydrogen. So these different policy choices also fostered hydrogen development, but also where international cooperation can focus on. Because despite all this policy effort, there seems still to be a big policy gap that we need to learn and understand and experiment with as we develop the hydrogen market. Generally, we mention off-taker availability is an important success factor, but yet it's not guarantee, it seems, because also the off-taker wants to know what it is or she's buying, whether if it's green renewable hydrogen, and that's where international collaboration for certification, definition, standards are important. And also to create demand for off-takers for certainty, the target setting will be key. Country partnerships are key, but also within the countries on public-private sector partnerships, including sharing of information, understanding experience from first project developers. And finally, on the financing side, I think improving project bankability, having a list of bankable projects for financiers for a somewhat risky technology until commercialization is achieved will be necessary. So far, successful projects have benefited from de-risking, concessional finance, and blended finance in the future could also play a role. I think these are the things, or the long list of issues we've discussed today. This has also provided a lot of critical inputs for our own strategy at the OECD and how we can position our secretariat in this growing debate on global hydrogen market creation and development. So this has also been very, very helpful for us. And I hope also these discussions have helped to your organizations, but also to the broader energy and climate and financing community. Thank you to all participants again, and a replay of this event will be available at the COP27 virtual pavilion of the OECD. And I wish everyone a very good day. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.